Hye-kyo lovers, Lee Min-ho just mentioned Song Hye-kyo's name in a public setting and Song Hye-kyo blushed, and the footage of that blush is destroying the Hye-kyo community in the most complete and most beautiful and most scientifically undeniable way that this pairing has ever managed to destroy it. Was this a coincidental flush of color that happened to appear on her face at the exact moment his voice said her name in a room she was present in? Or was this the most honest and most involuntary confirmation that the human body is capable of producing, the specific physiological response that cannot be performed, cannot be managed, cannot be produced on demand by even the most experienced and most publicly sophisticated actress in Korean entertainment history, because it comes from a place that exists entirely below the reach of professional training and public discipline. Stay till the very end, because what is inside this footage is not just a beautiful moment between two people. It is a biological truth, a physiological confirmation. The human body saying what the public persona has been carefully managing for a very long time. Before we break down every single dimension of this blush and why it changes everything, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications, because Hye-kyo is in a chapter where the evidence is not just accumulating but escalating in ways that require your full and constant attention, and you cannot afford to miss a single moment. Now let us talk about the blush that Lee Min-ho's mention of Song Hye-kyo's name produced that has given the Hye-kyo community the most irrefutable evidence it has ever held. Hye-kyo fans, brace yourselves, because what just happened in that public setting is categorically different from every piece of Hye-kyo evidence the community has previously analyzed. And the categorical difference is not a matter of degree but of kind. Every previous piece of significant Hye-kyo evidence, the body language and the eye contact and the protective moves and the private smiles and the proud wife reactions and the stage messages and the airport encounters and the live unscripted words, every one of those required some level of interpretive engagement to arrive at its full meaning, some application of the community's accumulated analytical intelligence to translate what was visible into what it signified. The blush requires nothing. Over the past several days, this footage has been circulating through every platform where Hye-kyo fans exist with a velocity that reflects not just the emotional weight of what it contains but the specific quality of evidence it represents. Evidence so direct and so physiologically unambiguous that even the most determined skeptic cannot reach for the usual dismissive alternative readings without running directly into the fundamental biology of how the human circulatory system works. Fan accounts from people who were present in that room and footage, analyzed from multiple angles, have produced a documentation of this moment so detailed and so convergent that what it shows is simply the truth, stated in the language of skin and blood and the involuntary nervous system. Let that sink in completely before we go any further. Not a facial expression that could be interpreted as professional warmth. Not a body language pattern that requires comparative baseline analysis to distinguish from collegial comfort. Not a behavioral departure from an established norm that is only legible to people who have been watching closely enough to know what the norm is. Song Hye-kyo, in a public room, hearing Lee Min-ho say her name, and her face turning the specific color that faces turn when the name that was spoken belongs to the person who lives in the part of you that your professional training has never been able to reach. Blush, uncontrolled, unmanageable, physiologically impossible to fake. The most honest thing the human body produces. And it produced it when he said her name. Let us establish with a full scientific and emotional precision this moment deserves exactly why a blush is categorically different from every other form of evidence the Hye-kyo community has ever worked with, because the categorical difference is the foundation of why this footage has produced the community's most complete and most sustained and most deeply felt response to any single piece of Hye-kyo evidence in the entire documented record. Every other form of evidence that this community analyzes, from body language to facial expressions to behavioral patterns to verbal choices to scheduling overlaps to proximity behavior, operates in the domain of the interpretable. However compelling the evidence, however sophisticated the analysis, however thoroughly the baseline comparisons establish the significance of a departure, there is always a theoretical possibility, however remote, of an alternative reading. This is the inherent limitation of behavioral evidence, not a weakness of the analysis but simply the epistemological reality of working with evidence that exists in the domain where human beings exercise some level of conscious or semi-conscious control. A blush does not exist in that domain. A blush is produced by the autonomic nervous system, the part of the nervous system that operates outside of conscious control, that regulates the involuntary functions of the body without reference to what the conscious mind would prefer it to do. When the autonomic nervous system produces a blush, it is responding to an emotional stimulus that has registered at a level below consciousness, below training, below the extraordinary professional discipline that Song Hye-kyo has spent 30 years developing and applying to every dimension of her public self-presentation. The blush that appeared on her face when Lee Min-ho said her name was not produced by her. It was produced by her body in response to a feeling that her body registers as significant before her mind has time to categorize it. It is the most direct form of emotional evidence available from a human being. It is the body saying what the person has been managing not to say in public. And what Song Hye-kyo's body said when Lee Min-ho's voice produced her name in that room is something the Min-kyo community has been waiting, in some form, in some expression, in some evidence type that could not be argued with, to hear the body say. Now let us track exactly what happened in the sequence of this moment with a detailed, patient, frame-by-frame attention that the Min-kyo community has brought to this footage from the moment it began circulating, because the sequence matters and every element of it contributes to the complete picture. Fan accounts from people who were physically present describe the setting with a specific detail that eyewitness testimony from invested observers always provides: the texture of the room, the atmosphere of the event, the professional context that surrounded the moment and gave it its cover story as simply another industry gathering where two significant figures happened to share a space. They describe Song Hye-kyo in the moments before Lee Min-ho said her name, her posture, her expression, the quality of her public presence in those preceding moments, and the accounts are consistent in describing her as fully in professional mode, gracious and composed, and entirely in command of the version of herself she had chosen to be present in that room with. The professional Song Hye-kyo, the one that 30 years of public life has produced as the default public presentation, was present and active and managing the environment appropriately. And then Lee Min-ho said her name. Fans describe the fraction of a second between the sound of her name in his voice and the appearance of the blush, the specific quality of that fraction, the way it felt in the room to people who were watching, as the most suspended and most electric moment the Min-kyo story has produced in any public setting. And then the blush appeared. And the room, in the accounts of every fan present who was watching her face at that moment, became a different room. Because something true was suddenly, briefly, completely, physiologically visible in it. Here is where Song Hye-kyo's specific and extensively documented character becomes the absolute clinching argument for why this blush means what the Min-kyo community says it means, because the blush did not arrive on any face. It arrived on the face of Song Hye-kyo. And understanding who Song Hye-kyo is in terms of her relationship to public emotional expression is what makes the blush not just moving but conclusive beyond any reasonable doubt. Song Hye-kyo is an actress. A great one. Someone who has spent her entire professional life inhabiting and expressing human emotion on camera with a precision and a depth that has made her one of the most celebrated performers in Korean entertainment history. She has performed love and longing and joy and grief and desire and every shade of human feeling in between on camera, for audiences of millions, with a specific professional skill of someone who has mastered the technical craft of emotional expression across 3 decades of serious artistic practice. She knows what blushing looks like from the outside because she has produced it as a performance tool in dramatic contexts across her career. She knows how to produce the appearance of a blush when a character's emotional state requires it. And she has never, across 30 years of documented public appearances, across hundreds of industry events and press gatherings and shared professional spaces with dozens of colleagues, produced an involuntary blush in a non-performance context in response to another person. Not once. In 3 decades of extraordinary public visibility, she has never blushed in public like this. Until Lee Min-ho said her name. The first time something happens in 30 years of a fully documented public life, it is not coincidence. It is the specific, unprecedented truth that only one person in the world can produce in her. And that person just said her name. Let us go through what specifically happened to Song Hye-kyo's face and body in the moment of the blush with the granular precision that this community's analysis has developed. Because the blush itself is the headline, but the full sequence of her body's response to hearing her name in his voice contains additional evidence that compounds the significance of the central physiological event. The first thing fans documented was the specific location and quality of the blush itself, the particular pattern of color that appeared on her face and the specific areas where it was most concentrated, because blush patterns in adults are not uniform across individuals, and the specific pattern tells something about the intensity and the origin of the emotional stimulus that produced it. What appeared on Song Hye-kyo's face has been described across multiple independent accounts as the specific blush pattern associated with deeply personal emotional activation, concentrated in the specific facial areas that respond most directly to the autonomic nervous system's emotional response, rather than the more diffuse facial flush that physical stimuli like heat or exertion produce. The second thing fans documented was the specific sequence of her response in the seconds immediately following the blush. The micro-expressions that moved across her face as her conscious mind caught up with what her autonomic nervous system had already expressed. The specific sequence of recognition and attempted recalibration that occurs when a publicly experienced person becomes aware that their body has produced an involuntary response in a public setting. The sequence tells its own story. There was the blush. Then there was the fraction of a second awareness of the blush. Then there was the specific expression that appears on a person's face when they are attempting to recalibrate their public presentation after an involuntary disclosure. And then there was the quality of the recalibration itself, the specific way Song Hye-kyo's professional composure reassembled around the blush and what that reassembly looked like, which fans have described with consistent language. It looked like someone who knows exactly why they blushed and is quietly, privately, completely at peace with a reason, performing the professional recovery not from embarrassment but from the specific composed grace of someone who has been discovered feeling something real and who finds the discovery more affirming than alarming. The third element fans documented in the sequence is what Lee Min-ho's face did in the moment immediately following the blush, because his response to seeing it is the other half of this evidence, and it is equally significant. Multiple fans positioned at angles that captured both faces in the same moment have described what appeared on Lee Min-ho's expression when he registered Song Hye-kyo's blush, and the descriptions are consistent across independent accounts. He saw it. He registered it. And what his face did when he registered it is something the community has been reaching for language to describe with the same sustained effort that the most significant Min-kyo facial evidence always requires. The word that has emerged from that collective effort, appearing independently across observers who were not coordinating their descriptions, is the same word that has appeared in other significant Min-kyo analysis moments. Tender. His expression when he saw her blush was tender in the specific, private, completely unperformed way that tenderness appears on a person's face when they witness something from someone they love that they did not expect to be made visible in public, something that confirms what they know privately and that they receive with the quiet fullness of someone who has already decided that this person is everything. He saw her blush. His face went tender. And the exchange that happened in the fraction of a second between those two events is the most complete and most honest mutual disclosure this pairing has ever accidentally produced in a public space. The timing of this blush moment within the Min-kyo story is something fans have been examining with a contextual depth that only a community with a long and detailed documented record of a pairing can bring to a new significant moment, and what the timing reveals is both confirming and deepening of the existing portrait. This did not happen in the early, uncertain, carefully managed chapters of the Min-kyo story. It happened in the current phase of visible acceleration and increasing evidence, the phase in which the private reality of what these two people are to each other has been surfacing with new frequency and new completeness through the disciplined public surface that both of them maintain. The blush is the most dramatic and the most physiologically unambiguous expression of that surfacing yet, because the physiological response that produced it cannot be managed into invisibility the way body language and facial expressions can be, at least partially and at least temporarily. The blush arrived in this chapter of the Min-kyo story because this chapter is the chapter where what has been privately true for a long time has simply become too large and too present and too deeply embedded in both their lives to be fully contained. The blush is not the beginning of something being true. It is the involuntary physical confirmation of something that has been true for a long time, produced by a nervous system that has been responding to his name, his voice, his presence, his everything for as long as this love has been real, and that finally produced its response in a public space where the camera was running. Social media's response to the footage of this blush has been the most unified and the most emotionally convergent community response in the entire Min-kyo documented record, and the unity reflects something specific about the nature of this evidence. Previous significant Min-kyo moments, however compelling, required some level of shared analytical framework to produce the community consensus about their significance. Fans needed to have been watching long enough, needed to know the baselines well enough, needed to have the comparative context that transforms a single observation into meaningful evidence. The blush required none of that. The blush communicated directly, through the universal biological language of involuntary physical response, to everyone who saw it regardless of how long they had been following the Hye-kyo story or how much analytical context they carried. The Hye-kyo tags across every platform flooded with responses that had a specific quality of finalness to them. The quality of a community that has been building a case for a long time and has just received the piece of evidence that does not add to the case but closes it. Fans wrote that a blush cannot be acted, and Song Hye-kyo is one of the greatest actresses alive, and she could not stop this blush, which means it came from somewhere that acting does not reach. Fans wrote that they showed the footage to people who have never heard of Hye-kyo and do not know the history, and those people watched it and said that woman is in love with whoever just said her name, without any context, without any briefing, without any of the accumulated analytical framework, because the blush is legible to anyone with eyes. Fans wrote that in 30 years of following Song Hye-kyo's public life, they have never seen her blush, and they know what that means, and they are not prepared for what it means, even though they have been preparing for it for longer than they can precisely remember. Fans wrote that Lee Min-ho's face when he saw the blush is its own entire chapter of the Hye-kyo story, that the tenderness on it is the tenderness of someone who loves what just happened, who loves the person it happened to, and who is holding the knowledge of what the blush means with a specific quiet fullness of someone for whom it confirms rather than surprises. And through every layer of the community response, in every language across every platform, with the weight of everything this community has been building toward across months and years of patient watching, the word. Finally, what this blush reveals about the Hye-kyo love language in its current most exposed and most honest expression is something the community is processing with a specific reverence that the most significant Hye-kyo evidence always generates when it arrives at its most complete and most undeniable form. Hye-kyo has always communicated in the quiet frequencies, in the body language and the proximity and the private smiles and the stage messages and the coded words and the small, unguarded moments that surface through the disciplined public surface. The blush is this communication system producing its most direct and most honest message yet, because it bypassed the communication system entirely. It did not surface through the managed public surface. It surfaced through the skin. It came from the part of Song Hye-kyo that has never been available to management, the part that has been responding to Lee Min-ho since before the response was something she was aware of or had considered needing to manage, the part that hears his voice say her name and sends blood to her face without asking permission from anyone, including her. That is not a communication choice. That is the truth of the body expressing itself in the only way it knows how to express what it knows. And what it knows, what Song Hye-kyo's autonomic nervous system knows about what Lee Min-ho is to her, is the same thing the Hye-kyo community has been knowing from the evidence for a very long time. Only now the evidence has a blush in it. And the blush changes the evidential status of everything that preceded it from compelling to conclusive. The body language and physiological analysis checklist the community has been building from this footage is the most specialized and most scientifically grounded that any Hye-kyo moment has generated, because a blush requires analysis that goes beyond behavioral observation into physiological interpretation. The specific blush pattern documented across multiple footage angles, concentrated in the facial areas most directly responsive to the autonomic nervous system's emotional activation, rather than the diffuse pattern of physical stimuli, indicating a deeply personal emotional origin. The timing of the blush onset, beginning within the fraction of a second of Lee Min-ho's voice producing her name, the kind of response latency consistent with an emotional stimulus rather than a processed cognitive response, indicating that the response began before her conscious mind had fully received the stimulus. The duration of the blush, sustained across multiple seconds rather than appearing briefly and disappearing, indicating a sustained emotional activation rather than a brief spike, suggesting a deep and continuous emotional response to the ongoing presence of the stimulus rather than a simple reaction to its initial impact. The quality of her subsequent recalibration, which fans have documented as composed and peaceful rather than embarrassed or alarmed, the specific quality of someone who knows why their body did what it did and has no conflict about the reason, only the professional need to return to the public surface that the involuntary disclosure briefly departed from. And the absence of any comparable response documented in 30 years of Song Hye-kyo's public life in response to any other person saying her name in any comparable public context. The specificity is total. The evidence is complete. The blush belongs only to him. Let us explore what the speculation this footage has generated tells us about where the Hye-kyo community understands this moment to sit within the larger story, Because the interpretive work fans have been doing around this blush has produced some of the most emotionally complete and most narratively rich thinking this fan base has collectively arrived at across the full documented record. Some fans have been focused on what Lee Min-ho said immediately before or around the moment of saying her name, what the context of the mention was, whether he was simply referencing her professionally, or whether the mention carried something additional that his voice or his phrasing or his choice to mention her at all contributed to the stimulus that produced the blush. The community's general reading is that the mention itself, the simple fact of his voice producing her name in a room she was present in, was sufficient stimulus without requiring any additional loading from context or phrasing, because the blush appeared in the fraction of a second rather than after a processed reception of whatever meaning the mention carried. Her body heard his voice say her name. That was enough. The rest of what he said was received by her mind. The blush was produced by her body before her mind had finished receiving anything, which tells you something about the level at which he exists in her. He exists at the level where his voice saying her name is sufficient stimulus for the autonomic nervous system to produce a blush before the cognitive mind has processed what the voice was saying. He is in her at the level below thought, at the level that precedes awareness, at the level that is simply, completely, physiologically true. Now everything you are feeling needs to be in the comments immediately because this community needs your voice in this conversation more than it has needed it for any previous Min-kyo moment. Tell me where you were and what you were doing when you first saw the footage of Song Hye-kyo blushing when Lee Min-ho said her name and what specifically happened in you when you watched it. Tell me whether you think Song Hye-kyo was aware in the moment that she was blushing, and if so whether you believe that awareness changed anything about how she felt about having blushed or whether the composed quality of her recovery tells you she received the disclosure with complete peace.